of substance. Modi has 3 events lined up today. The last of them is the most important one, a private engagement at the White House. The Prime Minister is expected to spend around 2 hours there. And then tomorrow is the big day, the ceremonial welcome, the bilateral and the state banquet. We will be covering all of that from close quarters, but today we'll focus on day 1 in New York. Everyone's talking about Modi's big meeting with Elon Musk. Apparently he's a big fan. Also the big yoga event at the United Nations headquarters. It's a world record. How is India using yoga as a soft power tool? We'll discuss all of that, but first, the headlines. Russia accuses Ukraine of terror attack, claims Kiev targeted a military base near its capital. Moscow says it downed 3 Ukrainian drones. The attack comes amid Kiev's counter-offensive. U.S. bomber jets land in Sweden for the first time in modern history. The American jets will take part in training exercises with the NATO invitee. Sweden abandoned its 2 centuries of military non-alignment to seek NATO membership last year. Fighting resumes in Sudan minutes after the latest truce ends. Intelligence service headquarters in the capital Khartoum have been set on fire. Army warplanes fly over several districts. The warring generals blame each other for the violence. New York passes a bill to protect doctors prescribing abortion pill. It shields doctors who prescribe the pill to patients in states where abortion is banned. The bill is expected to be signed into law soon. And Cristiano Ronaldo adds another feather to his cap. He's become the first male footballer to make 200 international appearances. Ronaldo celebrated the milestone by scoring the winning goal in a European Championship qualifier.
Welcome, Modi! Welcome, Modi!
Let's recap day 1 of Prime Minister Modi's visit. He landed in New York around afternoon. The scenes were as expected. A big Indian-American crowd had gathered at the airport. There was dancing, singing, and a lot of noise. We spoke about how vibrant the Indian-American community is, and that vibrancy was on full display. The crowds weren't just at the airport, though. They also gathered elsewhere in New York, like at the iconic Times Square and in front of the hotel where Prime Minister Modi was staying. It was overwhelming but unexpected lines. After soaking in the welcome, the Prime Minister got down to business. He didn't have any political engagements, though, but he did meet some important people. There were discussions with think tanks, healthcare experts and academics, plus sit-downs with Elon Musk and Neil deGrasse Tyson. The meeting with Musk is getting a lot of attention. It was their second meeting, and afterwards everyone was asking the same question. Will Tesla come to India? Well, Musk hinted at some positive news. He said that he's planning to visit India next year and that Tesla will begin India operations as soon as possible. Listen to this.
He really cares about India because he's pushing us to make significant investments in India, which it is something that we intend to do. And we're just trying to figure out the right timing. I am a fan of Modi, so I have to say that.
So what's stopping Musk? Apparently taxes. India's import duty on electric vehicles is 60% and more. Elon Musk wants India to reduce that. And what's the government saying? Well, why bother with importing? Set up a factory and make your cars inside India. That's reportedly the government's position. No import, no taxes. Perhaps we could see an arrangement soon. But that was day 1. Day 2 is also about yoga, all about yoga, you could say. Today is the 21st of June, which is International Yoga Day. The Prime Minister was at the United Nations headquarters. He led a mega event in front of the lawns. Take a look at this.
Yoga is free
from copyright. The power of yoga, not only to be healthy, happy, but also to be kind to ourselves and to each others. Let us use the power of yoga to build bridges of friendship, a peaceful world, and a cleaner, greener, and sustainable future.
We're told this was a world record. You've heard about the health benefits of yoga, now hear about the political benefits. Yoga is India's gift to the world. It's a major soft power tool. Prime Minister Modi recognized this early on in his term. In 2014, he addressed the United Nations General Assembly for the first time. This was his message on yoga.
योग केवल व्यायाम भर न होकर अपने आप से तथा विश्व व प्रकृति के साथ तादात्म्य को प्राप्त करने का माध्यम है। आइए हम एक अंतर्राष्ट्रीय योग दिवस को आरंभ करने की दिशा में कार्य करें।
United Nations listened. The very next year, International Yoga Day was celebrated, and now it's an annual event. We see major cities holding mass yoga events on this day. We see embassies joining in. All of this signals yoga's soft power credentials. In fact, I have some numbers for you. In 2019, the global yoga market was worth $37 billion. We're talking about a wide range of things, like yoga mats, online classes, studios. All of this made up $37 billion. By 2027, it is expected to reach $66 billion. That's a growth of 9% per year. Here in the US, it's a big hit. There are more than 48,000 yoga studios and Pilates studios across the country. Plus, I'm sure a lot of online ones. How does this growth help India? For starters, familiarity. Through yoga, a lot of people will learn about India, our ancient practices, our culture, and of course, our core beliefs. Think of it as an introductory course to the country. The Prime Minister talked about this today. He linked yoga to New Delhi's emerging worldview. Listen to this.
युज्यते एतद इति योगः, अर्थात जो जोड़ता है वो योग है। इसलिए योग का ये प्रसार उस विचार का विस्तार है जो पूरे संसार को एक परिवार के रूप में समाहित करता है। योग के विस्तार का अर्थ है वसुधैव कुटुंबकम की भावना का विस्तार।
Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam means the world is one family. It's also the slogan of India's G20 presidency. So yoga can export Indian culture and worldview to other countries. But there are material gains too, like yoga tourism. When people learn about yoga, they will want to visit the place of its origin, to see how yoga is practiced in India. Now, it's hard to say how big this industry is, but I'll give you a ballpark idea. Global tourism is worth around $3 trillion. And around 14% of that is wellness tourism. Yoga would slot right into that. The event at the United Nations headquarters is all about visibility. Most people already know about yoga. Today's event was for those who did not. With that, the Prime Minister's New York leg came to an end. His next step is here in Washington, D.C. We're expecting him to land in the next hour or so. And here there is not much room for soft power. It's all about hard power, talks and strategy, defense deals and geopolitical challenges. And one country will dominate those talks, India's northern neighbor and America's chief rival, China. Make no mistake, the folks in Beijing are keenly watching this visit. I bet they won't like what they see. A massive reception, a state banquet, all of it signals growing cooperation between India and the U.S. And that's bad news for China. Back in New Delhi, there is consensus on one thing. China is the new big challenge, not Pakistan. China is the challenge. Here in Washington, there is a similar consensus. China and not Russia is the chief rival now. So there is unity on that front. There may be difference on the approach, but the sentiment is the same. China means bad news. How is Beijing reacting to this consensus? Well, there are 5 stages of grief, they say, and China is on the first stage, denial. Their former foreign minister, Wang Yi, wrote an opinion piece this week. The headline sums up the story. This is what it says. India's economic ties with the US cannot replace its trade with China. One question though. Is he telling this to the world or trying to convince himself? Now, Wang Yi is still a prominent figure in Beijing. When US Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited China, he had 3 meetings, and one of those meetings was with Wang Yi. So what he says carries weight. It's not the musings of a former diplomat. Let me quote some important bits from what he has written. As feared by many Indian elites, Washington's vigorous efforts to strengthen economic and trade cooperation with India is primarily to slow down China's economic development. Let me simplify that. Wang Yi says America has an ulterior motive, that they're using India only to weaken China. He says Washington pays lip service but seldom delivers. Broadly speaking, this op-ed has 3 arguments. 1, America is not genuine, it is only using India. 2, India cannot replace China in the global supply chain. And 3, nothing can stop the rise of China-US trade or India-China trade. Now let's analyze these arguments. Is America really playing India? Well, if they are, the acting is top class, we have to say. It's up to Joe Biden to disprove Wang Yi's statement. India has made the leap of faith. The US needs to reciprocate with concrete moves. As for supply chain and trade, it's too early for that, really. Yes, bilateral trade is growing, but these things cannot change overnight, or for that matter, in 1 or 2 years. Realigning trade and supply is a long game. It takes years. The fact that India and the US are doing that, working towards that, has spooked Beijing. Wang Yi also has some advice for New Delhi. He says promote trade and cooperation with China. Well, why not? It's not like China tried to seize Indian territory or killed Indian soldiers, except they did exactly that. India's position on China has been clear. In fact, the Prime Minister reiterated it during an interview. This is what he said. For normal ties with China, peace and tranquility in the border is essential. China doesn't seem to understand that. Their proposal is this: forget the border, let's increase trade. I'm afraid that won't fly. America's equation with China is also complicated, minus the border. Let's look at the events of this week. Joe Biden sent his top diplomat Antony Blinken to Beijing. The expectations were rock bottom. And so were the results. It was actually classic Cold War playbook. Both sides agreed to stabilize relations, but they did nothing to actually implement that. In fact, Biden may be doing the opposite. He attended a campaign event on Tuesday, Joe Biden, and he spoke about the spy balloon saga between the US and China. And while doing that, he called Xi Jinping a dictator. He said Xi was embarrassed because he didn't know where the balloon was. Needless to say, China is not happy. Their foreign ministry has called it absurd and irresponsible.
The relevant remarks by the US side are extremely absurd, irresponsible, and seriously violate basic facts, diplomatic protocol, and China's political dignity. They are an open political provocation. China is strongly dissatisfied with and firmly opposed to this.
Question to China, though. What do you call an unelected leader who has appointed himself for life? If not a dictator, then what? Biden and Modi will have to figure that out. China may not be the only issue on the agenda, but it's an important and urgent one. Something that even voters in both countries realize, which is why Biden said that he did what he did at the campaign event. He called Xi a dictator. New Delhi and Washington will have to figure out a roadmap. What will the US-India plan against China look like? Is it purely economic? Is it purely strategic? Is it a mix of the two? Let's see if tomorrow's bilateral gives us some answers to these questions. We understand why China is angry about this visit. But why are US lawmakers angry? Not all of them, but a sizable section. Around 75 million lawmakers have written a letter to Joe Biden. And what do they want? They want their president to raise so-called areas of concern with Prime Minister Modi. And what are these concerns? Well, the usual stuff. Alleged human rights abuses, attacks on religious minorities, and democratic backsliding. I'll simplify that for you. These lawmakers want Joe Biden to lecture Modi on democracy. As simple as that. But who are these 75 people? All of them are Democrats, just like Biden. There are 18 senators and 57 members of the House. You may know some of them, like Bernie Sanders. He's technically independent, but he sits with the Democrats. Elizabeth Warren is another name on this list. So is Pramila Jayapal. These members are part of the so-called progressive wing of the Democratic Party. I guess progressive means meddling in other countries. The letter uses a very complex strategy. It doesn't oppose Prime Minister Modi's visit, neither does it say anything against India-U.S. relations. In fact, it strongly advocates both. Let me quote from what it says. We join you in welcoming Prime Minister Modi to the United States. We want a close and warm relationship. That is why we respectfully request that you also raise directly with Prime Minister Modi areas of concern. How absurd is that? Imagine you've invited someone to your home, you welcome them, saying that it's a pleasure to host. But after that, you unleash a rant. You trash your visitors' way of life, you question their parenting style, you also tell them how to manage their families. How would you feel if you were on the receiving end of this? Offended, I'm sure, which is why most rational countries don't do this. Not the Americans, though. They love lecturing others on human rights and democracy. What about their own record? These 75 lawmakers won't talk about their own record. India is one of their favorite targets. Let me tell you a bit more about them. Both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren ran for president in 2019. Biden beat them to get the nomination. Back then, both leaders had criticized India. This was around the time when India revoked Kashmir's special status. Sanders and Warren felt that they had to say something about it. I guess gun violence and racism were not pressing enough. Pramila Jayapal is no different. She pushed a resolution on Kashmir in 2019. I say resolution, but it was more of a diktat. Lift the internet shutdown. Don't use violence on protesters. Remember, this is a US lawmaker telling India how to administer its own province. Needless to say, the resolution was defeated. But imagine the opposite happening. What if an Indian MP proposed a resolution telling Biden how to solve the migrant crisis in Texas or the abortion bans? It's absurd, which is why it won't happen. A few other lawmakers have gone beyond these 75, like these two, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. They did not even sign this letter to Biden. Why? Because they don't think Modi should be here in the first place. Both Tlaib and Omar will boycott the Prime Minister's speech to the US Congress. What explains this attitude? Well, one reason could be domestic politics. Both Tlaib and Omar represent areas with a sizable Muslim population. And that vote bank is key to their electoral success. So what do? Well, they talk about alleged Islamophobia elsewhere. And India is on their radar, but it's not the only one. Israel is another country that these lawmakers regularly target. Both Omar and Tlaib have voted to stop selling weapons to Israel. My point is, this position helps them. It helps their politics. It helps to rally their voter base. And that's one of the reasons why they do what they do. The second is America's historical problem with lectures. They never seem to stop. These lawmakers feel it's their job to export democracy. But what authority do they have? An average congressional district has around 7 lakh people. That's the total population, not just the voters. In India's Lok Sabha, the biggest margin of victory is 7 lakhs. There is no comparison, really. And even if there was, lawmakers need to set their own house in order instead of lecturing other countries, because we saw how robust American democracy was during the Capitol riots. So this is what we have, both celebrations and criticism, as you would expect with any major visit. And behind the scenes, some serious work is also being done. We've been telling you about the defense deals. They are on top of the agenda. The Americans are going all out. The stage was set over the last few weeks. Biden sent his biggest cabinet members to India, the defense minister and the national security advisor, in quick succession. 2 weeks ago, Lloyd Austin landed in New Delhi. He's the US defense secretary. It's their version of a defense minister. He met with the Indian defense minister, Rajnath Singh, and the two leaders agreed on a roadmap for defense cooperation.
The U.S.-India partnership is a cornerstone of a free and open Indo-Pacific. And our deepening bonds show how technological innovation and growing military cooperation between two great powers can be a force for global good. And so on this visit, I'm pleased that we have taken new steps to strengthen our defense partnership. We established an ambitious new roadmap for defense industrial cooperation.
Some 2 decades back, this would have sounded impossible. But today, it's all happening. It shows how far the India-U.S. relationship has come. On this visit, some major defense deals are expected. We'll be able to confirm the specifics only when the official announcement has been made. But we can tell you that there will be 2 broad parts to it: jet engines and drones. I'll tell you about the jet engines first. A deal is in the works. It involves 2 companies, America's General Electrics and India's Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, or HAL. Now, this is extremely significant because they're talking about joint production. GE will transfer its technology to HAL. HAL will use this technology to produce engines in India. These engines will then be used for our indigenous Tejas jets. How does it help India? Well, India wants to expand its domestic defense production, and this deal is going to help. It's a much-needed boost for the industry. Also, a major shift in America's approach towards India. You see, such military technology is guarded by countries. It's a strategic asset. The Americans are very choosy about whom they share it with. And in the past, they've denied India access to critical tech, but now they're offering it, even pushing for it. And this shows how much they're ready to invest in the partnership. The other part of the defense deal is drones. India is looking to buy armed drones, around 30 MQ-9B Predator drones. They're manufactured by a company called General Atomics Aeronautical Systems, Inc. We spoke to the CEO of that company, Dr. Vivek Lall, on what they plan to do, which drones India wants to buy, and how soon they can be delivered. We'll bring you a part of that conversation in a bit. But first, let me tell you more about the deal. It is said to be worth $3 billion. The Defense Acquisition Council has approved it, so there's a good chance that this deal will be announced during this visit. India could get defense tech and drones. But that's not all. The US is also keen on the fighter jet program for the Navy and the Air Force. It's pushing Boeing Super Hornets and the F-21s. Another key aspect is BECA. BECA, it stands for Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement. Both nations are expected to sign on certain clauses this time. And this pact, BECA, was first signed in the year 2020. It helps India get sensitive data from US military satellites, something that could help in the border standoff with China. So India is clearly getting a lot. But what's in it for the Americans? Well, 2 things. One is weaning India off dependence on Russian weapons. And 2, countering China. India, remember, is the world's biggest importer of weapons. It depends on Russia for most of its military supplies. But the Ukraine war changed that. Moscow is preoccupied right now. New Delhi is still waiting for the delivery of 2 S-400 missile systems. So India wants to look at other options. And that's where the United States comes in. It seems like a perfect combination. In the past, though, it was far from perfect. For decades, India and the US had a frosty relationship, especially during the Cold War, even after that. Remember, during the Kargil War, India wanted GPS, the US said no. Same for nuclear submarines. India wanted them, Washington denied. In fact, until the year 2008, India-US defense trade was negligible. Fast forward to 2020, it was over $20 billion. So clearly the distrust is gone. Washington knows that it needs New Delhi, and defense ties have become crucial to this relationship. In fact, in an interview to the Wall Street Journal, Prime Minister Modi called the India-US defense cooperation, quote unquote, an important pillar of partnership. Well, they're on the right trajectory. What they need is sustained engagement and the right mix of incentives. It could take this partnership to new heights. Which brings me to the interview I just told you about. India is buying drones. They're talking about 30 MQ-9B armed drones. These are advanced machines. They're made by a company called General Atomics. But is it a done deal? Is cost still a factor? What kind of customizations are they talking about? And when will India get the drones? I put these questions to the Chief Executive of General Atomics, Dr. Vivek Lall. This is a Vantage exclusive. Prime Minister Modi of India is on a state visit to the US, and there is a wide agenda, but topping the list is defense. There have been talks about defense deals between India and the US and a significant shift in the defense relationship. With me is the man of the moment, the CEO of General Atomic, Mr. Vivek Lall. Welcome to First Post.
Thank you.
Let me not beat about the bush. Are you selling drones to India? Which ones and how many?
So we have a couple of drones already operating in India, and that's with the Indian Navy. And they are the MQ-9B pre-production aircraft. And they have flown over 12,000 hours at this point in India. And I think, there's a conversation, government to government, going on. And we are always standing by and ready to support the Indian government.
But the ones you talked about are on lease. They've not been sold to India.
That's correct. Those two are on lease to the Indian government.
Are we expecting a change?
Time will tell.
A lot of our audience may or may not have heard of General Atomics, but everyone knows about Predator and Sea Guardian, and it's been making headlines in India, all of this. Do you have a presence in India, and what are your plans vis-a-vis India?
Yeah, so we have several partnerships that we have announced recently, from the startups to the major companies there in India. And we continue to want to increase our footprint over there. Of course, we have various areas within the company that could be relevant for India, other than, of course, the unmanned systems. We have things like EMALS, which is electromagnetic launch and recovery system. And of course, we have a very strong nuclear fusion and fission business in terms of, advancing nuclear science.
We know that India is in the process of acquiring drones. And do you know what type?
Latest platform is the MQ-9B. And the MQ-9B is, again, the most versatile, high-altitude, long-endurance aircraft, unmanned aircraft in the world. And it's got all the components that are required to making it a resilient and robust platform to undertake the kind of operational needs that could be required by an Air Force or a Navy or an Army. And so that is our offering.
There are multiple players the world over in the drone manufacturing space, and this sector is expanding. What do you think made India zero in on the Predator or the Sea Guardian or the MQ-9B, as you call it?
So the MQ-9B, again, is a very versatile platform. It is a high-altitude, long-endurance platform, a unique capability that serves the mission requirements of India.
India is also very keen on defense companies, as most companies, to come and make in India. Do you see some sort of a partnership evolve on that front as well? Is General Atomics looking at doing something in India, manufacturing in India?
Yes, we made several announcements already, including with Bharat Forge, with HAL, with two startups, 114AI as well as Third iTech. And we are already looking at the ecosystem. We've talked to dozens of companies as to, where there can be synergies. And so I think the India footprint is going to continue to grow over time.
The shift that we're talking about in the defense relationship has also a lot to do with the technology transfer, the transfer of critical technology, which was denied to India in the past. And now it seems that there is more openness to share the jet engine manufacturing and so on and so forth. Do you see a gradual but clear shift in the way both sides are approaching this relationship?
The relationship indeed is growing to new levels. I do think that when it comes to technology, the level of innovation, especially in the startup community in India, is incredible. And we see a lot of great startups coming up with very innovative products. And therefore, when we talk about technology transfer, it's also about technology absorption, and it's also about a two-way street.
You've interacted with the Indian Prime Minister in the past. What was your impression of him, and can you tell us a little bit about the conversation, and do you think that has played a role in how the equation has evolved?
Yes, I do. I had a fantastic conversation with him when he was here last time in Washington, D.C., and I think he's a visionary. He understands what steps need to be taken from a policy perspective as well as an execution perspective to get to the next levels that are desired by the industry at large, and to catalyze that. So I was very impressed with his knowledge and his ability to translate some of the thoughts into policy prescription that could result in concrete actions. And you can see in the last few months, there has been so many good and positive initiatives that have caught steam, and there have been real success stories already coming out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the defense deal is making all the buzz, but there's another sector where the US and India are cooperating, and that's semiconductors or chips. They're often called the oil of the 21st century, the key to global domination. So it's no surprise that chips are a contested asset. The US and China are both trying to dominate this market. They're locked in what's called a chip war. As of today, Washington is leading the race, but China is catching up fast. Where does that leave India? Well, at a vantage point, we say, as a credible alternative to China and a reliable partner for the world. The US wants to move away from China. It wants to make sure that Beijing doesn't get critical technology. It wants to build semiconductors with like-minded countries, aka India. This is called friendshoring. Offshoring with friendly countries, that's friendshoring for you. And this is a big opportunity for India. Because irrespective of what the US wants, India has been pushing itself as an alternative to China. India does not have native semiconductor firms, so it's trying to woo foreign giants. And part of this push is a $10 billion incentive plan. It is aimed at boosting semiconductor manufacturing. And this works well for the US as well. America can support India as it tries to weaken China's chip industry. Again, this looks like a natural fit, and they've been at it for a while. In September last year, the Quad took up this issue. They moved to secure semiconductor supply chains. The Quad, as you know, is a group of 4 countries, 4 members: India, America, Japan, and Australia. And in March this year, an MOU was signed. A memorandum of understanding was signed. It was signed between India and the US. This was to establish a semiconductor supply chain. Reports say India has now cleared a $2.7 billion Micron chip testing plant. Micron is a major chip company in America. They will set up a plant in India. And this came just ahead of Prime Minister Modi's state visit. The plan is to set up a semiconductor testing and packaging unit. It will be built in the state of Gujarat. India has promised production-linked incentives. We're talking about incentives worth $1.34 billion. Remember, this is the same Micron, the same company that China has recently banned. Washington is asking American firms to invest in India and to move away from China. And the Micron plant is a good start. But this unit will only test and pack semiconductor chips. It won't make in India. New Delhi will have to aim for that, for making in India. For India to dominate the chip market, it will have to manufacture chips. Currently, the chip global supply chain is complicated. Chips are designed in the United States, they're manufactured in Taiwan and South Korea, and then they're assembled in China. If India wants to become a key player, it will have to move fast. It will have to ramp up manufacturing. The plans are already in place. India will get its first semiconductor plant in Gujarat. It is being built by Taiwan-based Foxconn and India's Vedanta. Similarly, ISMC Digital is planning to build a $3 billion fabrication plant. This will be located in the state of Karnataka. So India has the potential to become a key manufacturer if things move in the same direction and at the same pace. India could achieve that in 3 to 4 years. And then it should start work on the next step. Dream bigger. Think about chip design. As of today, it sounds like a long shot, but remember, India has exceptional talent pool. 20% of the world's semiconductor design engineers are from India. The government has launched a chip design center. The idea is to encourage a chip design ecosystem in India with or without American support. Back to Washington, and amid all the buzz about the state visit, the Bidens are in an awkward spot. This is thanks to the president's son, Hunter Biden. He's caught in legal trouble, and he's set to plead guilty for tax evasion. But that's only half the story. As the White House rolls out the red carpet for Prime Minister Modi, it is facing a flurry of allegations and accusations. The charge is that Hunter Biden has got off too easy and that the US Justice Department is going soft on him. Now, Hunter Biden is no stranger to controversy. For years now, he's made news for the wrong reasons. In this instance, the timing couldn't have been worse. Our next report tells you what the charges are and how the president is dealing with them in an election year.
Parents aren't usually very upbeat when their son is found committing a crime. much less admitting that he committed a crime. What are we talking about? Hunter Biden will plead guilty to tax evasion. He has also struck a deal with the U.S. Justice Department on a separate gun charge. But the Bidens aren't ordinary parents. Joe Biden is the President of the United States, and Jill Biden, his wife, the First Lady. They are powerful people. People that have lived life large in the political circles of Washington, D.C. Hunter Biden has had a rough life so far. He has dabbled in drugs, multiple relationships, including with his own sister-in-law, and even crimes. Yes, crimes. That's where things get serious, and not just any crime. We are talking about tax evasion. Now that's a whole different ballgame altogether, especially coming from Hunter Biden, son of the sitting US president. But Joe Biden doesn't seem very concerned.
Mr. President, have you spoken to your son today? Have you spoken to Hunter today? Please. Mr. President, any reaction to his guilty plea? Your son again?
Thank you. There's more. The White House has issued a short statement. It said the President and the First Lady love their son and support him as he continues to rebuild his life. We will have no further comment. Let's quickly tell you what the case against Hunter Biden is. The years were 2017 and 2018. Hunter Biden was supposed to pay the government $100,000 in taxes each year, but he didn't. Now that's a crime. For his failure to pay taxes, Hunter Biden technically faces 2 years in prison. But there's another charge against him. This one is gun-related. In 2018, a firearm owned by Hunter Biden was found in a dumpster in Wilmington, Delaware, apparently tossed off by his then-girlfriend. It was not a major crime until 2021, when Hunter decided to reveal that he was addicted to drugs at the time. That revelation raised the possibility that he broke federal law by purchasing a firearm, and for that charge, he faces 10 years in prison. So put together, Hunter Biden faces a maximum penalty of 12 years in prison for A. tax evasion, and B. for illegally purchasing and possessing a firearm. But now, Hunter Biden will plead guilty to the tax charges and struck a deal on the gun charge. So he is very unlikely to be sent to prison. But the Republicans have pounced on the opportunity to hit out at the US president. Donald Trump took to Truth Social to vent saying, "Wow, the corrupt Biden DOJ just cleared up hundreds of years of criminal liability by giving Hunter Biden a mere traffic ticket. Our system is broken." Republicans are comparing the Justice Department's treatment of Trump and Hunter Biden and claiming that there's an obvious bias at play. Whether that's true or not, Joe Biden would rather not have the Hunter Biden scandal break out right now. President Biden is upping the ante against guns, and he's also a champion of the wealthy paying more taxes. So his son illegally owning a gun and evading taxes does make things very awkward for senior Biden. Hunter Biden's controversies did not stop Joe Biden from becoming president in 2021. But the big question is, will it derail his re-election bid?
Before I begin the next story, brace yourself for some random facts about a seaport. But trust me, by the time I finish the story, it'll all make sense. We're talking about the port of Karachi. It is located in Pakistan. It first opened in the year 1857. And today it is the country's largest and busiest seaport. It handles about 25 million tons of cargo every year. That's about 60% of the nation's cargo. And this port is crucial, not just for Pakistan, but also for South Asia. It is one of the largest and busiest in the region. But why do you need to know all of this about the Karachi port? Because Pakistan is selling it. The country, as you know, is in crisis, in desperate need of money, so it is selling a key asset. The Pakistan government has drafted a 5-year agreement. They want to hand over 4 berths at the Karachi port. Do you know who the buyer is? The UAE, the United Arab Emirates. And this is not even the most interesting part. You have to see the pace of deal negotiations. They're moving at breakneck speed. A cabinet committee was set up, led by Finance Minister Ishaq. It met with Abu Dhabi stakeholders this week, back-to-back meetings on Monday and Tuesday. They quickly finalized the framework agreement and pushed for a go-ahead from the federal cabinet. As fast as that, it's only a matter of days now. A commercial deal is set to be signed in the next few days. Now, if you followed government contracts in general, you would know that these things take months, even years. So to have wrapped it up in just a few days is exceptional. Either the Pakistanis are very, very efficient or very desperate. I don't want to say which, but I'll tell you this. Pakistan is stuck in an economic vortex. The inflation rate has risen to about 38%. The cost of food is soaring, and it's only worsened since last summer. Last summer is when Pakistan suffered devastating floods. They caused damages worth $30 billion, 30 billion. The country is already buried under a pile of debt. It now faces the risk of default, meaning it may not be able to pay its EMIs on time. Pakistan had signed a bailout deal with the IMF in 2019, the International Monetary Fund. It was a deal worth $6.5 billion. This is the money that the IMF was supposed to give to Pakistan. But for this, Pakistan had to fulfill certain conditions. It did not. So bulk of the money has not come. And this deal is set to expire by the end of this month, in the next few days. Pakistan wants to revive it, but chances are dim. So selling the Karachi port may be a last-ditch attempt to raise some cash. And perhaps Islamabad saw this coming because last year, their government passed a law. It's called the Intergovernmental Commercial Transactions Act. This law is aimed at selling state assets and fast-tracking such sales to raise funds. The Karachi port deal is the first transaction under this law. But why the UAE? Because the UAE is Pakistan's third largest trading partner. The first two are China and the United States. Average annual trade between the two countries stands at $8 billion. It is also an ideal export destination for Pakistan because the distance between the two countries is not very much, so transportation costs are limited. Also, politically and financially, the UAE has supported Pakistan in the past. Hence this deal. But it only reflects the dire straits that the country is in. Selling state assets to raise cash is the last of the last resorts. It can be a dangerous trend for a rogue nuclear state. Our next story is about the Titanic, the doomed ocean liner. It was once the world's largest steamship. It was called unsinkable. But on the 15th of April 1912, it went down during its maiden voyage. 1,500 people on board were killed. Decades have passed since, but its mystique has endured. It is now considered one of history's most famous shipwrecks. People risked their lives to catch a glimpse of it, and last week 5 people did just that. They sealed themselves inside a deep-sea submarine. They embarked on a voyage, except now they've gone missing. It's a race against time to save them. Our next report tells you more.
These are the last seen visuals of Titan, a tourist submarine. Last Sunday, it embarked on a voyage in the North Atlantic to the Titanic shipwreck. Titanic was the largest ship of its time. It hit an iceberg on its maiden voyage in 1912 and became the holy grail of undiscovered shipwrecks. Its wreckage was found on the seabed in 1985. Since then, it has been extensively explored. By the likes of Ocean Gate Expeditions, this is a tourist company. And it charges guests for $250,000 for an 8-day expedition to the famous wreck, which sits over 12,000 feet beneath the surface. Ocean Gate's submarine embarked on one such journey last week, with 5 people on board, including a British billionaire. The group was sealed inside the sub. External bolts locked them in. Soon after the dive, the submarine went missing. Contact was lost an hour and 45 minutes into the dive, when the vessel was more than halfway down towards the wreck. Now, United States and Canadian rescue teams are scrambling to search for the submarine, racing against time to find it. The vessel had a 4-day supply of oxygen on board. This means the vessel has less than 30 hours of oxygen supply left. So the rescuers are fighting against time. So far, they've been unsuccessful in finding the vessel, and things aren't optimistic.
As explorers, we are pessimistic and objective, And as it stands right now, it would be a miracle if they are recovered alive.
I think they may be stuck at the bottom of the ocean. Perhaps there was a breach and water came in. I'm not very optimistic for their return, but it's a cliche, but it's true. If this is the end for them, they went out doing something they loved.
This mission is complex. There has been no communication from the vessel. Visibility is quickly lost below the surface because light cannot penetrate that far. And the area where the vessel was lost faced poor weather conditions. But undeterred, rescuers are working round the clock.
The area that we search is roughly about the size of Connecticut. As we continue on with the search, we're expanding our capabilities to be able to search under the water as well. And so we have a commercial vessel that's on scene now that has remote operated vehicles that will give us the ability to search under the water as well.
US and Canadian agencies, navies and commercial deep-sea firms are all helping the rescue operation. They've involved the use of military planes, a submarine and sonar buoys. These are small marine buoys that are used to detect and locate submerged submarines. So underwater acoustic research was conducted to locate the vessel. And today it proved to be a cause of hope. Rescuers heard noises in the area where the submarine went missing. Rescuers say they heard banging noises at 30-minute intervals. So US Navy experts are now analyzing the sounds. Some experts say that continuous noises suggest humans. But research is underway to prove it. Many aren't too optimistic. But the world isn't ready to give up hope just yet.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with Argentina. Violent protests have erupted there. This is after a constitutional reform restricted the right to protest. Demonstrations are on in Colombia too. Thousands are marching against economic and social reforms pushed by the country's leftist government. In the US, new footage shows the devastating aftermath of a tornado in central Mississippi. And finally, what happened today in history? In the year 1945, American forces captured Okinawa during the Second World War. With this began the Allied invasion of Japan. We're leaving you with these images. Thank you very much for watching, for your patience. We're sorry for all the noise. Like I said, it's a rainy morning in Washington, D.C., but we love bringing the stories to you from wherever we are. We'll see you tomorrow.
The bloodiest battle of the Pacific War has ended in victory for the Americans on Okinawa. 330 miles from the home islands of Japan, the stars and stripes are hoisted on this most vital strategic...
Son bulones. Una situación completamente descontrolada. Escuchamos que hay respuesta de la infantería.
Primero con 2 gases lacrimógenos y ahora sí, la policía que avanza de goma y también han lanzado gran cantidad de manifestantes. Que cuarto auto y la policía intenta exactamente, primero con gas, miras a la policía, ahí corren el portón, abren el portón directamente. Entonces, rompelo, no saques nada, rompelo. Es impresionante, no paran las leyes a avanzar.
why is it important for, one of the phrases that a lot of US officials are now using in the last 3 or 4 months is de-risking from China. Why should India be that de-risk component?
Well, I think these are different issues that are converging. India and the United States would be advancing their technology relationship regardless of whether we were de-risking from China or not. But the fact that countries don't want to be so dependent on China and want to have other supply chains and sources for semiconductors and other technology simply enhances the U.S.-India relationship and adds further impetus to it.
And how and why has this suddenly come to the fore that, almost 90% of the world's semiconductors are manufactured in Taiwan by one company? Did it just so happen, or is the world now really waking up to diversifying the semiconductor supply chain?
Again, I think if you looked 5 years ago, no one talked about supply chains. And what COVID brought to light was the importance of supply chains and critical dependencies and working with trusted partners. And folks looked around and realized that over time, a lot of the manufacturing of semiconductors had become concentrated in one place, and we now want to diversify that and do so to trusted partners. And that's where India comes in, and the United States cooperation and working together with India in this area.
Let's talk a little bit about the global context in which this state visit is happening. Of course, the Russia-Ukraine war is still going on, and frankly, there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. How much has that changed, not just the security architecture, but just the very conversations that leaders are having these days?
Well, the United States and India don't necessarily see eye to eye on every aspect of the Russia-Ukraine war. I think both countries would like to see an end to that war if possible and are against any infringement of territorial integrity and sovereignty. But we also recognize our differences and are able to talk about them openly and candidly. But one of the aspects is that India, which has been heavily reliant on Russia for military equipment in the past and spare parts, may be realizing that that's going to be an increasing challenge in light of Russia's own decline. And maybe that's another reason for accelerating some of the defense cooperation with the United States and getting some technology that can increase India's own ability to manufacture military hardware indigenously.
Talking about the threat that is the dragon in the room, as it were, which is the China threat. India's, of course, had its own problems with China over the last couple of years, in fact 3 years now, since Galwan, and the incident happened at the border. Now there is a talk, and especially more so after Secretary of State Antony Blinken went to Beijing earlier this week, and there is more and more talk about a possible US-China thaw. What may that mean for India and India's own sort of complications with China?
I think neither India nor the United States want to have a conflict with China. India would like to have a thaw as well if the Chinese would pull back from its northern border. And I think both countries agree, and countries in the region, that to the degree the relationship with China can be managed and there can be a floor on it and guardrails around it, that would be better. But at the same time, the United States, India, and other countries want to construct a positive architecture for the Indo-Pacific region that will promote their own stability and prosperity, not necessarily focused on China specifically, but focused on the positive elements of what it means to have freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight, peaceful resolution of disputes, no predatory financing for economic development. Those are the things that both countries and their like-minded partners want to work on.
And finally, just to take forward, you talked about the people-to-people contacts, how the diaspora has been always invested in this relationship. So in a sense, the governments are sort of catching up with the people. The people were ahead of the curve.
Well, it's been interesting. There have been times when the people-to-people relationship has been ahead of the governments, and there have been times when the governments have been ahead of the people-to-people, and it's gone back and forth, but they are mutually reinforcing. And if you step back and look at what's been accomplished in the U.S.-Indian relationship over the last 22 years, it's remarkable. And I'm not sure anyone in 2001 could have envisioned all that we're doing today in 2023. And credit goes to everyone who's worked to make that happen.
And it's getting reflected in a way in the bipartisan support that India has on the Hill. Now, again, we have the Prime Minister addressing a joint session of the Congress, invited by a Republican speaker, and the next day he'll be meeting the chair of the Senate, the Vice President. So on both sides of the aisle, it seems to be that, India is the country to back, and this is the long-term bet for America in Asia.
Well, I think this has been true in the United States and in India, that the relationship has increasingly garnered support from across the political spectrum, and it's one of the areas that there is agreement on in the United States that the U.S.-India relationship is an important one. It'll be a consequential one in this century, and that people support a strong U.S.-India partnership.
Prime Minister.
Welcome. You're watching CNN News 18's special coverage on Prime Minister Modi in America. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. And let's begin with some breaking inputs that are coming in. We are now learning that Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has just landed in Washington, D.C. As we all know, today, just a while ago, he emplaned from New York City for Washington, D.C. And the latest that we are bringing to you is the information that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has landed in Washington, D.C. Let me inform you that this visit of the Indian Prime Minister to Washington, D.C. is particularly significant and marks a new height as far as India and U.S. ties are concerned. A lot rests upon Prime Minister Modi's visit to Washington, D.C. because remember, there will be a host of events that he will be also attending, but most importantly, there will be a host of bilateral meets that will be taking place in the White House, and not to forget the fact that Prime Minister Narendra Modi will also be addressing the U.S. Congress. At the heart of his agenda lies a breakthrough as far as technology, critical emerging technology, and bolstering defense ties are concerned. Let's try and get in a sense of perspective in terms of how Prime Minister Narendra Modi is aiming to do that. And for that, let me bring in my guest today. I'm joined in by Tekender Parmar, who is the Tech Features editor of Insider. Many thanks to you, Tekender, for very patiently awaiting your turn because first of all, I know that there's been a lot of back and forth with regards to Prime Minister's landing. But now that we know that Prime Minister Modi is in Washington, D.C., tell us what can we expect as far as critical emerging technology is concerned, because remember, there was a very significant meet as far as ISET is concerned. Delegations from India and the United States met just some days ago. Will Prime Minister Modi's visit be able to take that meet forward in terms of critical emerging technology?
Right. I think this is a very pivotal moment in Indian and U.S. relations, especially when it comes to technology. And we see that on two fronts. The first front is defense technology and the agreements that are being